Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Wine and Spirits Exhibition. The 54th edition of Vinitaly was held from 10 to the 13th of April. If you missed it, don't worry. Go to vinitalyplus.com for on-demand recordings of all the sessions from the exhibition. And remember to save the date. The next edition of Vinitaly will be held from the 2nd to the 5th of April 2023.
Hello, everybody. My name is Polly Hammond, and you are listening to Uncorked, the Italian wine podcast series about all things marketing and communication. Join me each week for candid conversations with experts from within and beyond the wine world as we explore what it takes to build a profitable business in today's constantly shifting environment. This week, we're joined by Pauline Vicard, co-founder and executive director of ARENI Global, a research and action institute dedicated to the future of fine wine. Today, we get a sneak peek into their upcoming report, Fine Wine and the Restaurants, looking ahead after 2 years of global disruption. We'll talk everything from business models to staff challenges to the new relationship between consumers and hospitality. Let's get into it. Pauline Vicard, I'm so excited to have you here with me today. You're one of my very favorite people in wine and so smart.
Well, thank you so much. It's a big pleasure to be with you today. You're also one of my favorite people in wine, so it's always such a nice moment to have a good conversation with you.
So we're here talking today because you have just started presenting a report, and you are about to launch a report that comes from many months worth of research that's all about the relationship between fine wine and the on-trade, restaurants, role of hospitality, and what's happened in the past 2 years. And of course, our mandate with this particular podcast is business strategy and marketing. And when I had a chance to read the report prior to publication, there were a lot of things that stood out to me specific to how the fine wine world is moving forward in relationship to our gatekeepers, our hospo, and really our front lines. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Can you give me start with an overview? What is the report? Where did it come from? What do we need to know?
Yeah. So, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of the results. The report is called Fine Wine and the Restaurants, and as you've said, it's exploring how the relationship between restaurants, chefs, sommeliers, their wine list, and the customers have changed and evolved over the last 2 years. So I don't know if you remember, but we started exploring that question in April 2020. And at that time, everyone was so worried, like, are restaurants are going to be open again? And are people going to go out again? Everyone was so worried. And of course, looking at the streets today, we know that they've reopened and that people are going out again. But we wanted to explore what was the shifts and what was the very big, heavy, deep trends that we see behind all of that. And we also wanted to measure how restaurants and their wine list had been economically impacted by the last 2 years on a quite global level. It's part of a longer research project that we do with Bordeaux Négociants Mestresin about knowing the fine wine consumers better. So we've started that big research in 2019, and every year we explore a different angle. So this year was the perfect year to explore what happened with restaurants after the 2 years that we all had. And when you look at fine wine in particular, and fine wine stakeholders, for the lack of a better word, why it's interesting for them to look at restaurants, or to look at the on-trade, or, the unlicensed, or the CHR, depending on where you are and how you call it. But according to the CEEV, which is the European, a big European initiative on wine, restaurants, the on-trade sector represents 30% of all European wine sales before COVID. So it's a big route to market. It's a big distribution channel. Then when it comes to fine wine in particular, restaurants have always been part of what gave a wine, it's fine wine status, right? When you're listed in a 3 Michelin star restaurant, that's your proof that you are actually a fine wine. It was kind of a passport to the fine wine status. And then one of the reasons we also chose to really focus on that question this year was because more and more wineries do have their own restaurants with the growth of œnotourism over the world. So they also have restaurants to think about themselves. So that was those 3 reasons combined that we decided to go and explore quite deeply about that question.
So before we kind of delve into specific topics, in a broad brush, were there things that you discovered that were wholly unexpected? Like, were there just those moments when you were like, holy shit, we had no idea that this was the path that the industry had taken?
So maybe not like a massive big surprise, but just something that, I mean, to me hit me like, gosh, it's going to be harder and harder to be an export manager of a winery because the markets are more and more complex and more individual. So, you know, when I was learning about wine exports, we were talking about big, broad markets. You were even sometimes referring like the US market or the European market. And then we had to go country by country. And now in some situation, it's like city by city. So and every situation is different. And through COVID, there were so many ways of reacting, so many ways of adapting, and so many new business models that were developed that knowing your, I know it sounds, 101 kind of marketing lessons, but knowing your market and having a very individual approach is more than ever necessary, I think.
So you had to narrow that down for the purpose of this research. Can you just tell us where you chose to focus the research efforts? So what geographic markets? Was it geography? Was it demographics? Like, what were your parameters?
So maybe yes, on the methodology. So this, as a lot of things we do at ARENI, there's a lot of qualitative research. So that's our first step. It's like interviewing a lot of experts in the trade everywhere around the world. So there's no parameter on geographics or, where they are. We had to define fine wine, of course. We had to define what the restaurants we were interested in were, because of course we didn't study, the big chains, the big fast food chains or stuff like that, right? So we had to define those parameters, but otherwise, the goal of that qualitative study was to really give a voice of the different narratives that we found, and also explain the changes. We have a bit of data, and those data have been, we've worked with both Wine Services, which is a Bordeaux-based agency and that studies restaurants in particular, and Wine Intelligence, who study a bit more the consumers. So they had their own research parameters, and they've studied 6,800 restaurants across the world. But again, the parameter was the definition of the restaurants and not where they were located.
And in were there key markets that you were focused on? So you were saying how it's become more granular, and it used to be that we would talk about the US and European, but when you do that now, are you breaking that down so that we're talking about Paris versus Germany versus London, yes. San Francisco,
and
what does that look like?
In the report, we talk a lot about New York and San Francisco and Chicago, Texas and Florida to compare the US market. And even all those cities had a very different ways of reacting. Texas and Florida, for example, ignored COVID in loads of ways and didn't have the same lockdown as the rest of the US. So, of course, the restaurants were not impacted the same way. Then we have Paris and London. We've got Switzerland, which reacted in its very own way because, of course, the access to high net worth individual wasn't the same during COVID. There was loads of very wealthy immigration to Switzerland during COVID, so the restaurants were not impacted the same way. Then we have a zone in Tokyo and Osaka in Japan. And at the top of my mind, I think there's a couple of more, but you will have to read the report. And Paris and London,
Of course. Paris and London. Okay, so there are a few things that relate to just all of us and how we're getting by with our marketing and our consumer relationships right now that I wanted to ask about. You brought up something in this report that I had never seen before, that is this notion of the fifth food transition. I thought this was very interesting coming from a marketing perspective because it ties in so much to how we communicate our values and how we relate those back to our consumers. So, sort of, what is the fifth food transition? And I mean, very briefly, why is it fifth? What happened? 1 to 4.
Yeah. So it's actually, so again, when we wanted first to know how many restaurants reopen after COVID. So that's quantitative data. But then we wanted to understand in what mindset the restaurant reopened with, like what were the bigger, deeper trends that were affecting restaurants, but to some extent the wine world and all of us, because they're very global social trends. And so the food transition, it's a sociologist term that explain through the story of mankind the different moment in time where we change the way we feed ourselves and we access food. And because accessing food is so important for mankind to survive, it actually changed the way societies are organized. And so the 4 first ones, the first one goes back because it's when Homo sapiens started to use fire to cook his food. And that was the first big change that happened in mankind alimentation, eating. Then the second one, the second one, when it comes to food, French and English sometimes don't really translate well. The second one is when, again, humanity domesticated some plants and animals. So it's, the stops of nomadism, and they actually become to be sedentary and dedicate themselves to that kind of agriculture. The third one is the development of big cities around the world. And at the same time, we separate the production and the distribution of food. So we start to have 2 very different systems, one for production, one from distribution. And the fourth one is the one we were in until the beginning of the 21st century, which is the industrialization of the food process. And the fact that, food like wheat happened to be in international markets and all of that, and we produce food in an industrial way. So the four first transitions were led by innovation or discovery that really changed the way we organize ourselves in society and the way we relate to food. The fifth food transition, if you look at what socialists are writing, it's not socialists, sociologists, are writing, started at the beginning of the 21st century, and it's a movement that's initiated against the industrialization of food production. And it's a movement which is very global. We tend to think that the change that we see in the way we feed ourselves are very led by the Occidental, very wealthy world, but it's actually a very global transition. And even when we work with French Observatory of Eating Habits, and over the last 5 years, for example, it's really something that they see through all social class, for example. So it's not just something for wealthy Occidental people, it's across the board. It's the way we change the way we look at how we feed ourselves, and it's the way we want to eat better. And that's the notion that we've been exploring, what eating better means in that fifth food transition.
So is that in terms of healthier, or our values, or affluence, or access? Like, what is that?
It's all of this, because, as you know, what eating well evolves through time, and we don't have the same connection to that. So eating better today for this fifth food transition means first rethinking what's good. That's I don't know if you heard about it. That's the notion of One Health that has been developed by the WHO and a whole lot of international initiative after the pandemic of 2003. So it's not new, but it's also started after the SARS pandemic. And that's
right, SARS, bird flu.
Yes, thank you. That's the notion of One Health, which is there's not the health of people, the health of animal, and the health of plants. It's like if we all want to be healthy, it's all interconnected. So that was a big change in how we saw and define agriculture, not just a way of like feeding humans, but if we all want to be healthy, we had to take care of all those three things. And our health impacts other living things' health. Then the second thing is rethinking healthy. When I was growing up, rethinking healthy was like less sugar, less salt, 5 vegetables a day. The notion that we've seen appearing in a lot over the last 3 to 4 years is it works better in French because it's manger sain, manger sans. So eating healthy, eating without. So without gluten, without dairy, without anything added. But what's new, and we've seen really emerging, like enhanced through COVID, is eating without pain. So without causing pain to others. So it's mainly directly to animals. So no pains caused to animals because of their death, for example, because we're eating them. No pain caused to animals because we exploit them in the agricultural system. And what I think we're going to see is the no pain to humans as well. So not only we're going to look at where the food comes from, how it's been produced, but are both animals and people who actually produce the food were treated well.
So I want to kind of go off course for a minute. Of course, we've just had the issue where we've got Michelin-starred chefs converting their entire menus to vegan and vegetarianism, and either the support or the outrage. It seems like you're either on one side of the fence or the other. Is this coming from the consumers up, or is it coming from the decision makers and the stewards? So those being, our, for want of a better word, I'm going to use the word influencers, but I don't mean that in a social media context. I mean the people who in the top level of decision making are allowing their own value systems to come into the work that they've done and making these broad sweeping decisions about changes.
Well, I think it's a bit of both, because again, this is a big international trend. And I've talked at the beginning of how it was difficult to define a restaurant, but the original definition of restaurants when they started to appear in France was actually to restore people. So to restore your health, you were going to restaurants so that you can feel better after that. And they were serving like different broths that were supposed to like give you some energy and all of that.
Wow, I never thought about that. That was the origin of the word. I learned something new today. That's amazing.
And so a lot of restaurants people after COVID, they went back in, like consciously or not, to that original definition. Like restaurants are a place where people can go out feeling better, either because they had an amazing moment, so they are to gather and not to impress anymore, but also because what we've served them is good for them. And of course, the notion of what's good for you is going to be both driven by what consumers think is good for them, but also what the chef thinks is good for them. So it's a bit of both. So for a lot of restaurants that went to plant-based, for example, after COVID, some of them is really because the chefs are like totally convinced that it's the only way forward. For some chefs, it's also a way of showcasing their knowledge because they want to push the boundaries of really creating interesting dishes through plant-based so that they can show the world it's possible. So the different motivation behind plant-based for top restaurants have been slightly different.
You know what I find interesting about this is that if we look at the data around, what so many of us learned how we spent our time during lockdowns, we had a resurgence in amazing home cooking. We had people at home learning how to make Negronis with Stanley Tucci. We had every cocktail glass get sold out. Like all of these things that prior to the pandemic had been, well, we will just go out into the world and experience it. We had to bring that into into our home spaces and really level up as individuals. So I mean, in my head, what I'm thinking, and I'm going to go out and read about this and find the research on it, is did our evolution at home as individuals who had been consumers of fine food and fine wine, did that leveling up mean that then the restaurants themselves had to push the boundaries that much further, to show like plant-based cooking? Any of us who've lived with vegans know that you can have some really subpar at-home attempts at great vegan dishes, but you can also have in the hands of proficients and masters amazing meals. It's just hard to learn. So, I'm super curious from a marketing and consumer perspective, how much it's a back and forth cycle of what we're driving each other to learn and explore and push.
So I think, as you said, restaurants also had to adapt because people had 2 years of like cooking and exploring with food themselves at home, with success or not, depending on who you are. And I think what changed, I mean, one of the things we've seen is chefs went back to, and when I'm again saying chefs, I'm talking premium restaurants. So there's a definition in the report. It's quite extensive, but I'm not talking all restaurants that here.
Sure.
But without, denying the importance of technical know-how, which is still very important, they went back to opening the restaurants with a need for more emotion and an intuitive approach as well. It's all part of, I guess, one of my main takeaway from the report when it came to what are one of the biggest trends that we see at the reopening is a complete redefinition of excellence and what excellence means. And to me, it's very valid for restaurants, but it's also very valid for fine wine, because again, fine dining, fine wine, they all share the same roots. They have the same origin. They grow together in some ways, even on a language point of view. And you can replace, in loads of the analysis in the report, you can replace fine dining by fine wine and you will have, exactly the same lessons. But that shift from intellectualism and really thinking through, which always been one of the signs of excellence, like if you want to push the boundaries, you have to think about it and you have to be very technical about what you do. Not going back away from that totally, but just, okay, technique, it's not the only thing that matters. We have to have emotion and we have to gather and not simply impress. That was one of the big takeaways. And it goes back also from, the second thing is from elite to popular in some way. If you look at the language of grand restaurant, grand vin, high cuisine, like haute gastronomie, it's always the same language. Like that was the idea of rising above, of being higher than other people. So by nature exclusive, because there was everyone, and then there was the fine, the high, like the better, that was driving also that notion of again rising above and being better than the rest of the crowd. And I think this is also shifting to something a bit more popular. Okay, we don't want to think we're better than everyone else, because again, people have cooked during COVID and they've learned things, and so we just want to accept everyone and post something a bit more down to earth as an approach. That was one of the big shifts that we've seen. And if you look at the fine wine
now hold on. I'm going to completely interrupt on this one, because I know we've talked about that. I mean, this is so conflicted. We are internally conflicted about this, right? Because look, honestly, there are a lot of things that we do better than everyone else. We are there. We are fine in ways that some of our counterparts are not. So, I mean, I think this comes back to the question that there's no good answer for. How do we be inclusive and both exclusive at the same time?
So again,
is it at this point? I mean, well, hold on. At this point, are we just looking at, we're just like you, but we're more expensive? Like, How do we message this? How do we convey the excellence?
I think it's mostly a change in attitude, because again, the chefs or or even the fine winemakers, they're not suddenly going to drop techniques, because again, that's one of the reasons for the excellence, and because they really have a developed sets of skills and know-how and loads of other things. I've got a quote that maybe I can read to you that I think sums up this quite well, but it says, and you can again change fine dining for fine wine, but the fine dining restaurants have for too long considered that the guests were lucky to get in, to access to their art and cuisine. COVID has helped many chefs realize that the cuisine matters, but it is nothing without the guests. It seems obvious, but it changed the perspective of many that are now reopening with the aim to provide hyper-personalized service and make each guest the real star of the show. So I think, to your point, they might cook the same thing, the same dish, but in their approach, it's not like, come in because I'm a superstar chef and I'm going to impress you. And like, it's like, come in because my cuisine is interesting and I want you to discover it. And I want you to have an amazing experience with my cuisine. So I think it's just a shift in a change in balance. And again, a change of attitude. You can be very confident about your cuisine. Again, you can do exclusive things in a way that you're cooking expensive things. So the meal is going to be expensive, but it's just the process of going in and accessing it that could be different. And the importance that you will be given to people that eat the food compared to the importance of people that make the food. And in wine, it's a bit of the same way. But it can also be about the service, right? And how you present the food. Maybe you can cook exactly the same thing, but you don't present it the same way with like half an hour long description of like Swedish fermentation and those different blends. So maybe that's the same. Like maybe you don't change your technique that much, is the way you interact with it. We had an interview with Ferran Centelles, who was the head sommelier for El Bulli before it closed and now works for Our Bulli Foundation. And we talked about rethinking hospitality, because that's also something, when we think about the notion of excellence, that's changed a lot. Like, how do you receive people? How do you host people? And he said, we have to stop like quoting facts and, just stating information, because either the guest doesn't care, or if he cares, he can just Google it. That's one of the things that has changed also. Like, people have all the information they want on their phone. And he says, my role as a sommelier, and I think it's the same for a waiter, my role is not to describe what you're going to drink. My role, if I'm pouring you the wine, that wine needs to taste better for you. So my role is to enhance your olfactory pleasure, not just to give you fact that you can just Google in like 2 seconds. And he gave a really good example of that. It was like, I can come with a bottle of wine and tell you, this is your Rioja Grand Reserva. It's been aged like 2 years in American oak. It's a Tempranillo grape, which has, I didn't revise, so like very dark skin and soft tannins, right?
Sheet.
Yeah. Walking text sheet. But if you go to the table and you're like, this is a Grand Reserva Rioja, and to my opinion, this is the best that Spain can offer at the moment. It's so Spanish, it's amazing. Then you're going to approach the wine with a totally different perspective on that. And so, to your point about, again, excellence, do we cook different things? Do we change? Like, does fine wine restaurants suddenly start just serving ratatouille and beurre bourguignon and fish and chip? Maybe not. I mean, they will still have to propose something quite unique and probably very technical about how they cook. But the way we present it, the way we welcome the guests, the way we, even, again, services will change. And it's already changing to some extent.
This is something, so I want to come back to the wine, but I do want to say this is something that we're seeing across luxury brands as well, right? That there is an effort to have offshoot second labels representation that is more inclusive to new audiences across channels as well, but also this heavy focus on the customer experience. We've certainly done interviews here. I know you've done research as well around how essential that has been for luxury to redefine itself across, across what is really just a very noisy market. I want to go back to the wine thing though, because I think that what you're saying, if we just replace dining with wine, I think that it's going to get pushback. I think it's going to be challenging. We live, we work in an industry where there's such this push toward, if I just educate them, if I tell them all the things, on the text sheet, if I explain why this is important, and I'm just sitting here wondering, how are we going to get our producers to adopt that?
Well, I think to some extent, some of them, and again, it's very difficult to generalize when we talk about fine wine because it's a big market. There's loads of different actors, but as you were saying, it's a noisy and crowded market, and there's more and more fine wine produced every day for the pleasure of all of us customers all around the world. But it makes some wines more and more difficulties to sell. So I think when you mentioned influencers, but I'll say like important leading voices that do ask again and again about different narratives. And those are conversations that we have even on the teaching and learning process. Because I think it's going to happen when the big teaching institution also change what they require from sommeliers or people working on the floor and keep the facts because they're important, but also start adding, again, service, experience, that type of different communication. And of course, it's going to change as well. I mean, it will be slow, but I'm sure the clever estates will see that if they come up in the market with a different story than the rest of their competition, they will have better results, right? If they start talking about different things than just stating facts. Facts are still very important. And if I can just use this, facts are super important. And please, winemakers, have a text sheet which is up to date, which is easily accessible, because we still need this. But that might not be what we want to tell the customer.
Right. I think, though, that you hit the nail on the head with one word there: clever. Yeah, clever wine estates are not only going to be doing this, they are already doing this.
Yes.
And I think that there is this element of, we're preaching to the converted. Like when we go out with this kind of research, a lot of times the first people who are going to read it are the ones who fall into that category of progressive, clever, interested, willing to adopt things. I think that where I see having the big challenge are the small, overwhelmed, extremely talented, but just not, for them to adapt communication is bizarre, is difficult.
Well, then you can rely on your intermediaries and middlemen. I mean, the middlemans are not sometimes understated and underconsidered in the world of wine, but you probably work with importers and distributors or agents, depending on how you come into the market. Those are the people that should be here to help you as well. And again, because middlemen are more and more questioned for their role and their place on the supply chain, because we all want to go direct in some aspect. When you can't go direct and when you're not, for loads of very, very good reasons or valid reasons, just ask more of your middlemen. Like it's their role as well to give you this, to be here for you and to advise you on this in some ways. And to some extent, I mean, not to quote Mestre too much, the négociant from the Place de Bordeaux that we did the research with, but that was their main purpose. They wanted to do more for the estate they represent. So they needed to understand the market better so that they can be that kind of relais for their property. Relay. To bridge that gap. And I think, again, for intermediaries, that's going to be a big differentiation point.
One of the things that I find super interesting about this is that we work with a handful of distributors. We work with a lot of wineries, and the winery distributor relationship is or can be very challenging, especially when you are going through, for instance, the importing into America, where those distributors have huge portfolios, out of sight, out of mind, that kind of thing. Anyway, what I'm thinking is, you've got Miss Huza, who's doing this. I did a panel yesterday for Vinamark in South Africa, who are doing amazing work to, really improve the knowledge and experience of their wineries. This is a space that clever members of that distribution chain can really distinguish themselves and reestablish what their value to the whole system is. So maybe instead of talking to the wineries with this, we need to be talking to our distro, to our gatekeepers, to all of those people who sit between the producer and the consumer.
And there could be, I know, well, you know me, I'm always I like collective approach. I like group approach. And I know it's not, but there's...
Oh, you French woman.
Yeah, but there are very good examples. When you say winery, I might go a bit off track, but I'd like to quote them here if they allow me. The Taurus families are doing many things that are very interesting in the world of wine, but they have a project that's called the Seven Wonders. And so they work with 7 estates, but like small estate next to them in DOs that are less known, like Monsanto, and you'll know them because they're close to you. And what they do with those 7 estates is they open the routes to market to them. So it's not just a support on winemaking, it's a support on distribution. And it's a support on, okay, you could go there in this market. This is who we work with. And we think you're interested enough to be in that market as well. Because for them, it's a long-term sustainability plan because they understand they can't be fine on their own. So the more they push those estates, that by having good distribution system, by having stories and narratives that are fitting those markets, then they can sell more expensive. And again, it's creating that virtual circle.
Yeah, 100%. They're by lifting the perceived value of an entire region, they're allowing all of them to reach more and ultimately make more money. I mean, that's brilliant. It's the same principle as, in real estate, there used to be a thing around developers. You go in, you buy one house, but then you buy the third house down from it on each side, and then the third house down from that. And in doing so, you're lifting the value. You go in, you redo them, you're lifting the value of the street. Yeah. That is fascinating.
And back on your point on language, and I'm a small winery. I don't have time. I don't know marketing. I don't believe in marketing sometimes because you also hear that.
Yeah.
You can have, again, it's finding support in different ways because we know winemakers can't do everything, but it doesn't mean that their job is not more and more complex and they have so many different skills to achieve. Either you have them yourself or you find support.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we all talk about that one now. I kind of want to jump from that to, there were some things that I noticed, again, standing out. The business models are changing. And then, of course, we're dealing with, especially in America, the Great Resignation, which is producing tons of issues for clients that we work with. So what did you find in this research around adaptive business models and how we are dealing with a shifting labor force?
So when it comes to business models, I can talk more precisely on the business model of the wine lists and maybe not on the restaurant establishment side.
Yep.
So what we've seen, because we also wondered when restaurants reopened, did they reopen with longer, smaller wine lists than before, with more expensive wine, less expensive wines? So those are the quantitative data that you'll find, in the report on several markets. So you can compare, and basically market reacted, of course, differently depending on the situation they were at. And there's the US on one side, London and Paris on the other side, and then Switzerland and Japan. Those are interesting, differences to see how the wine lists have evolved. And then we wanted to know also what was the buying strategy of the sommeliers and how they adapted it. And we've seen 3 major changes. One was totally changing direction, right? So it's the chef that wanted to get stars, they wanted to be a Michelin star restaurant, and they were chasing the star, and then suddenly they abandoned the idea. So by abandoning this idea, by totally redirecting again the vision to be a restaurant that restore, for example, they cut the price by 50% because they were not going to do the same cuisine for the same reasons. So the wine list aligned. then there are people that rethought their margins. There's more and more people that have worked for the most expensive part of the wine list, which is where fine wine stands usually. They stopped, applying percentages. They applied an absolute margin, which allowed them to decrease the price of those wines. But I mean, it was also because they had to. I mean, again, one of the big changes for those restaurants was the absence of tourists and the fact that they had to deal with local population that usually, at least in Europe, are not willing to pay the same price as European international tourists. And then the last thing that we've seen is people that slightly decrease the price of their main wine menu, but they've raised the price of the buy the glass program. So either because, more and more fine wine restaurants are working with a set menus because they can no longer do à la carte because that is too expensive. Mm-hmm. So you have a set menus, you buy in advance, so you pay in advance as a ticket for a concert, and then you go and you've got the set menus. They can't really change the price of that set menus because it's like taking people hostages, like they have to pay more to come. But wine is always seen as an option so that they can increase the price of by the glass. So, out of the 7 wines that they were pairing with the food, maybe they've changed 3 that allows them to keep the same price but have more margin, or they develop 2 options, one with a more accessible wine menus and one with a more premium, really for people to have choice but still make quite a lot of money using generating cash with wine as well.
Right.
But you always have to be careful as well when you talk about changing wine lists and how people buy, because you don't change your strategy overnight because you have stock. So you can't suddenly say, I'm going to totally change because you still have those 300 bottles to sell. So unless you are operating with very, very, very small stock, which is not the case of most restaurants.
Wow, that's super interesting. And I mean, again, I'm just thinking about what a good lesson that is for anyone who's listening, because margins are, oh my God, they're always our biggest challenge, right? Yeah. So that's a great takeaway, Pauline. High five. Okay, so then what about the staffing issues? Did this come up? Because I'm hearing this all the friggin' time.
Yeah, and if you looked at it philosophically, it's the same at both ends of wine production. So viticulture has problem finding staff and restaurants have problem finding staff. So the people working in the vineyard and the people standing on their feet to pour the wines are difficult to find. So yes, it's a huge problem. We had Michelin star restaurant that operated with brigades of 8 sommeliers. They reopened with 1, all those kind of things. And they also, those who reopened with people sometimes, but again, a very big diversity of situation, right? Depending on where you are, were you able to pay your staff through COVID because you were supported by your government, or did your staff came back to their original countries and didn't come back? So that was a big movement as well. But yeah, across the board, all the sommeliers, all the wine directors that I spoke to are actually implementing education program of some form in their restaurants, because the people that they've restarted with also sometimes are starting with a low, not a lot of experience, because they just come to hospitality, and because you're a premium restaurant, you need premium services. So you need to make those people evolved in a quite rapid and quick way. And again, we've seen 3 different strategies, and usually they are all mixed together. The first one is how to diversify skills. So there's not that many restaurants that reopen with okay, we're still going to have very, very different skill sets for each of our staff. Everyone needs to know how to do a bit of everything, because even if you find staff, they can have COVID and they can be in lockdown for 2 weeks. So you need everyone to be able to catch up with their teammates if their teammates are not coming to work. So developing a bit of that. Then, of course, there was talks about flexibility and a raise. Again, that was really important in some countries. So giving people better work condition so that they would accept to come back. And then the last one was also on top of, salaries, what people want to find is a sense of purpose and a sense of evolution. So when to recruit people, not only you need them to be paid decently, you also need to give them a horizon, like an idea of how they could grow on your restaurant. And that's also something that we've seen develop like a totally different human resources plan for the staff. And I think that, restaurant wineries can help in this as well. I have to quote Jane Hansen and the program that she's putting together about hosting in Bordeaux sommeliers from
her
all
mentor
around.
week.
Yeah, the mentor week, and getting sommeliers from all around the world in Bordeaux to experience, the different chateaus firsthand, and learn how, and see the wineries, see the vineyard, and of course taste some of the wines that they might not have access to before. This is a great initiative, because then you have people coming back with so much knowledge, and not only you've been a mentor, but now they're also an ambassador, and then they can quickly acquire new skill sets.
I think, to be fair, this is probably this is probably several podcasts worth of information talking about the labor stuff, because sort of for everything you say, I'm thinking about, but we have the challenges of, extremely niche education that we're seeing right now. We've got a proliferation of very well educated, but wine specific potential hirees. And, what does that mean? Like, if we're asking people to change midstream when they, I look at you as, future MW, and the amount of work that you've done to have this incredible but very specific amount of knowledge. And then to say, that's great that you have this knowledge, but we also need someone who can, fit into all of these other requirements. I just, I worry for both sides of that discussion.
So if I can just say, if I can use the podcast as a platform as well, because I know you're quite listened in Italy and in Europe. When we stay on the staff thing, as you know, there's loads of migration happening in Europe at the moment, with Ukrainian coming to Europe and being received. It's always a moment that us in the wine world and also in the restaurant world, we need to be careful of, because it's always a moment where there's abuse of people, and then illegal work, and then bad condition of employment. And when it's all aligned, like immigration coming to a country, people really need people to work in both the vineyards and in the restaurants. So if you're a winery or if you're a restaurant owner, just be careful on how the people that you are going to employ are going to be recruited, just so that they're treated well, because we've seen that happening in other moments when we had those big waves of population. Sorry, that was a bit of an off-topic thing.
It's true. And of course, social sustainability is a factor that's coming up time and time again. I'm sitting in today on two panels that are both bringing up social sustainability. So we're talking about this a lot more.
But to your points about education, I don't think we have to learn more. I think we have to learn differently. There are some I'm discussing this with the ASI quite often. Like, do we still need to learn the 13 communes that are allowed to produce I can't even remember the Italian name, I'm sorry, DOC. Maybe we don't need to learn that by heart, because again, Google knows. Maybe we need to shift a bit what we require as knowledge. And same thing, the MW is a bit of a different beast, because it's so broad, but I still think there are some missing parts in the MW when it comes to, alcohol and health, for example. There's loads of different things that we could change and adapt, and also the requirement of the different certification around the world.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that, just from a comms and marketing standpoint, that all of these people have so much power to affect what the consumers think of us and our products and what we do. And honestly, to hear them just spouting the technical details kind of makes my heart break. I did an interview with a young woman named Diva Giles a couple months ago, and she was talking about in her wine bar how she encourages stories, but there's no wine geekery. So the story might be the server's personal experience with that bottle, but that is a human narrative that we can all latch onto. Whereas when we get into sort of like, the information overload, it just doesn't sit in our brains, or at least not for most of us.
So that's a very good point. We also had that quote on when we were talking about excellence in hospitality and service, and we have loads of people that say it's the time for the individual waiter or sommelier. There's more space for them to show their personality today than they were 15 years ago. So maybe if you have staff and you're not going to change totally the way they were trained, as you say, midway, maybe they can keep their very technical knowledge, but your requirement is like, go and pour the wine and tell the people why you love it and why you personally think it's a good choice. And
let them know that it's okay to do that. Because I think a lot of them think, I've been hired for this particular purpose, and do I have the agency to actually be myself in the space and to share my stories? And it's not all about just production and details. Yeah. So that notion of letting them know that they have agency. You hire well, you trust your people, you give them voice. Yeah. So I know that we're coming to the end of our time. Just talk to me very quickly. What happens next? So you've done all of this research. Was there anything that we can take away kind of for the next steps of the consumer relationship or the restaurant, entree, fine wine market?
What's next for that study? Or?
What's next for, so like if we look at it, were there things that the consumers are saying to us now that the world is reopening? Are they getting out into the world for tourism? Are they wanting to order online? Do they want more Zoom events? What's important to the customers?
They want everything.
They want everything.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, again, it's a more and more complex word, and as you know better than me, and there's not one thing as the consumer. There's the consumers with many, many different varieties of behaviors. But I think what we've seen, which is again a big trend through consumers' expectation, is the need to be more engaged. Again, it's to be part of something. So be part of like a relationship when you go to the restaurants. Be part of a restaurant, like really engage with what they're doing, why they would go out and have a meal, because they want to be part of something. They want to support companies that they believe in and restaurants that they believe in. So it's again, we've talked about consumers' engagement for years now, but I think it's a really global trend that people want to be engaged. Then people are at very different stage of their mental health recovery as well, which is something as marketers we need to be careful and aware of. Some people came back with like a happier mindset. Like some people are like, yay. And some people are like, okay, I'm still very, very affected. So I think this is, again, there's not one answer. Just be careful of the mental health of your consumers. And I think even your own mental health, because we are all at very, I think very that's really, steps.
We sell alcohol. Like, I think that we always have to sort of bear that in mind, where we are at a given point in time. Okay, so this report is not yet public, but it's about to be.
Yep.
If people want to access this report, when does it come out and how do they get it?
So I don't think I've talked about this, but this report is published through ARENI Global, which is a research institute dedicated to the future of fine wine. How we work is we've got 6 forces of change that we study on a very global, maybe funnel approach. How's the world is changing, how it's impacting fine wine, what can we do about it? That's how we organize the research. So to find anything about us, and because this is just one part of what we study many, many other things. So you can head to the website. There's loads of things that are public. 80% of what we do is public, the article, the podcast, some of the publications, some of the events. The next one is on what cooperative can bring to the future of fine wine. There's going to be an interesting conversation as well. And if you want to access all of the reports, including this one, you can become a member and support our research that way. And then you can get access to everything that we do, and you can get access to all the events and like the think tank that we do and the roundtables where we have meaningful conversation about the future of fine wine. I hope that was clear.
That's awesome. Yeah. So go online, go to ARENI Global, or go to your social media accounts, subscribe. I know that you've got a pretty regular newsletter. Subscribe, and that's probably the best way to stay informed in your inbox. Is that right?
Yes, we've got 3 more publications coming up this year, one on sustainability and trying to look at different angles of sustainability that may be less talked about at the moment. And we've got, because we haven't talked about that, what is fine wine and what does it include and what does it take to be fine? And all again, that notion of excellence and how it's changing. So we're publishing a white paper every other year. And so we'll be launching the 4th edition of that white paper by the end of the year as well. So if you're interested in all those conversations as well, you can join us. We've got loads of conversation platform. And we're interested in hearing from you as well. So
and you're just very personable, and you answer all of our silly questions on Twitter, which we love you for that. Pauline, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I know that you are presenting this set of data and reporting almost daily this week. So to have you share it with us, I'm so grateful for that. And I'm going to let you go be free now to use that big brain of yours for more MW studies and research. And thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Polly. It was a pleasure being with you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining us today. And a very special thank you to Pauline Vicard for being willing to come in, talk with us about some of these findings before the report is even live. The Italian Wine Podcast is among the leading wine podcasts in the world, and the only one with daily episodes. Tune in each day and discover all our different shows. And be sure to join us next Sunday for another look at the world of wine marketing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Vinitaly International Wine and Spirits Exhibition, the biggest drinks trade fair in the world. Save the date! The next edition of Vinitaly will be held the 2nd through the 5th of April 2023. Remember to subscribe to Italian Wine Podcast and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find us at ItalianWinePodcast.com. Chin chin!
Guys, I'm Joy Livingston, and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love, and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.